ladies, and welcome to our December 2020 Mom to Mom. Can you believe that we are finally about to wrap up 2020? A lot of us are more than ready for this year to be done. If you're watching this online, more than likely you're sitting in the comfort of your own cozy, warm home. For those of us who will be in person this month, in just a couple of days from now, we are going to be freezing cold. So gals, if anybody checks this early, don't forget your mugs and Uggs for this Thursday evening at 7 p.m. Oh, I'm so sorry. I forgot to say, I am Gail Farrell. This is Missy Grant. We're going to be co-teaching this month on the subject of sibling relationships. And actually, we're doing this in a two-part series. This has been a highly requested subject for a couple of years now. So we decided as a leadership team to break it up and to really give it the time that it deserves. So today we're going to primarily be focusing on laying a foundation in sibling rivalry. And then next month in January, we'll be taking a look at sibling conflict, biblical ways and good ways and bad ways to go about helping to resolve those conflicts, and then having a time for question and answer. So let's dive in.
Yeah, let's do that. So basically what happened is Gail and I were preparing and then started talking to the leadership team. This is a very large topic. And what we were falling into and seeing is that so much of this is actually about sibling conflict, but everyone kept talking about sibling rivalry. And so as we just worked through it, we realized that the umbrella is definitely sibling relationships. A slice of that is sibling rivalry, and a slice of that is sibling conflicts. So we don't want you to be too frustrated, because we are going to talk some specifics towards the end on some hows and give you some suggestions and encouragement. The bulk of that, though, is going to happen in January, and we're also going to have a very robust Q&A in January. So just hang with us on that. We're going to get there. It's just going to take a little bit to do that. We just felt that, and Gail just presented it so well to me, that we needed to speak about sibling rivalry first, and foundation-wise of just how we parent and why we do what we do. And so there's some big whys with that, and we're going to get to that in a little bit. Gail's going to also talk about one another commands. You've heard us speak about that. And then we're going to jump right into some specifics that I think will be helpful for you. A few things we would like to acknowledge before we even start into is that we realize as adults that you have siblings, many of you do, and you may have some broken relationships with those adult siblings, and that impact how you parent. So we just want to encourage you. Keep doing the right thing in those relationships. Keep trying to restore as best you can within your family. And we just want to continue to encourage you and applaud you for wanting to do it differently within your little family group. That takes a lot of courage. Many of you may not have had this mentored in your families growing up. I didn't. Much of what you're going to hear today and next month was not mentored for me or shown to me or modeled for me in my home. I had to learn this as an adult. So we know that could also be your situation as well. We just want to applaud you for trying to do it differently and look to God to do that. So just an encouragement along those lines as well. We also know that we have single moms that are out there, and we also have blended families, which make all these issues a little more amplified. God's word applies the same to all of our situations. So all of this will apply to you as well, regardless of really what your family situation that you find yourself in at the moment. Gail and I are not experts. Your mentor moms are not experts. We've just been around the block a few more times.
Absolutely.
Than you have. Gail and I have a lot of kids between us, a lot of grandkids between us, including daughters-in-laws and son-in-laws. So we just have a lot of life where there's a lot of family interaction. And so our hope is just to share with you what God has done in our lives over the past 30 years probably, and some things that have worked, some things that maybe haven't worked as well as we would have liked. We've both talked with our adult children about this, and just want you to know your mentor moms, any one of them could be sitting up here with us giving you the same information. They have the same life experience as well. So use them and talk with them. They're just full of rich encouragement for you. Some of you may have children maybe that are a little older. Maybe you're dealing with teens or kind of that in between. We just want to, and maybe what you're hearing today is something that you've not done before, or you haven't done it to this point, and that can be really discouraging. Don't be discouraged. We've always told you, start where you're at. Just start where you're at and watch God work. All right, so take it in. Don't be discouraged if you haven't done this for several years. Just step in, hear what we're talking about this week and next month, and just start right there, okay? Also want to remind you that the family unit is God's training ground. It's not the only training ground, but that family unit is very, very special to the Lord. And if you don't think so, look where Satan has attacked, because he's attacked the family over the years, and has actually had some successes in that. And some of what has happened in our culture is really the breakdown of the family. So we're here to encourage you in that family unit, and just a reminder that it is the training ground. In order to learn, you have to be taught. So your kids have to be taught by you. So take on that role as a teacher and lead them and teach them as you are learning as well along the way. All right. Want to talk about one particular part of this that we're going to go into more detail in January. This one's going to be a little tricky in that I'm definitely going to probably get some pushback from some of you about this. And it really has to do with gender responses when we're parenting. We have a tendency in our society to answer, well, guys are this way, gals are this way, boys are this way, girls are this way. And sometimes that actually gets in the way of our parenting and within our family unit. And so I just want to encourage you, sometimes when we respond that way, we're actually denying God's creative power and how he created a child, how he created you, how he created me, how he created Gail. And we want to encourage you to get to know your child. You have a son. Maybe that son just loves the outdoors, is really active, is really athletic. Just you see him come to life in leadership roles. That's great. Parent that. That's what you need to do. You may have a daughter who's the same way. Parent that. You may have a son who's a little more quiet, who's a little more introspective, who isn't maybe as active in the outdoor type of things that we as a society say that guys should be. Parent that. We're not going to sit here and have the nature-nurture debate. We're not going to win that debate or try to debate that with anybody. All I'm saying is take a look at God's word, see how he created your child, and parent to that.
And Missy, that's so, you're probably getting there, but I was going to jump in to say, obviously that's so biblical, because that's what Proverbs is talking about when it says, raise up a child in the way that he should go, and when he is old, he won't depart from it.
That's right.
That really means according to his bend. So know him and parent him in that way that he needs, and it may be different than what his siblings need.
Exactly, and that all is such an important part of the different relationships within your family and within siblings. All right. Okay. So those are just some things off the top we wanted to put in front of you to get you thinking about a few things. We want to talk about the big why, and the big why here is really scripture, and everything that we are going to respond to in your questions and suggestions that we make to you, perhaps within your family unit, is based on scripture. And here's the big one. Many of you are familiar with it. It's Mark 12:28 through 34. Let me read it to you, and then we can talk about it a little bit. And one of the scribes came up and heard them disputing with one another. And seeing that he answered them well, asked him, that's asking Jesus, which commandment is the most important of all? Jesus answered, the most important is, hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. I'm going to stop there for a minute. Do you remember last year when we were teaching on discipline and I talked about the Shema? And that's what those words right there, hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Jesus did that on purpose because he knew his audience. He knew as soon as he said that, he would have their immediate attention. All right, that is part of Jewish prayers, is part of the Old Testament. They would have known, oh, we need to pay attention right here. Something very important to be said. That's what we talk to you about in discipline. Whenever you see this, pay attention to the next couple of sentences, because that's probably the most important part of the text. Well, here it is right here. He says it to them. He now has their attention, and he says to them, and you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and with all your strength. I'm going to stop right there again. Jesus knew, again, who his audience was. Remember we talked about last year that Hebrew language is very visceral. It's very connected. It almost demands a response. Greek language is very cerebral. all right? He went with the Hebrew language here because he knew that within that, in our culture, American culture in particular, we separate out those terms with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind and strength, as if they're separate. Hebrew culture knew that that was the entire thing. So when he's saying love the Lord your God with all of this, he's saying love the Lord your God with your entire being, everything you do, think, feel. That's what he's saying to them. The second is this: you shall love your neighbor as yourself. This is very important. There is no other commandment greater than these. That's it. It's that basic. When he is saying here, you shall love your neighbor as yourself, that was very hard for them to hear, to love their neighbors. One, we take that as our immediate family groups and loving within that, and then the outpouring of that to our nearest neighbors. So right now, our nearest neighbors that we're speaking about is going to be our family group. The other scripture that we add to this, again, you would know this very well, Philippians 2:3, do nothing from selfish ambition or conceit, but in humility count others more significant than yourselves. If we can teach that one to our kids, we've really
got it made.
Right. We've really taken some really big steps forward. So those are really the big why of where we're teaching and where that's coming from. There's very specifics on how to do that. That has a lot to do with the one another commands. And so I'm going to hand it over to Gail unless she has anything you want to add to that. Or
no, the only other thing I was going to say is that next verse in Philippians. So the next verse, verse 4 says, do not merely look out for your own personal interests, but also for the interests of others. And that's just it in a core, what we want our kids to do, and to just be treating each other kindly and with respect. So again, we're going to get into a lot more detail in just a minute. But so just one more foundational topic that we thought that we just had to mention that Missy already alluded to are the one another's. So it turns out that there are 59 one another commands in the New Testament. I didn't realize that there were that many. Ladies, online, so you're going to be handed out this handout today for those of you who'd like a paper copy, but we also have it available online. It's just good to review. It's not at all that we think you're going to go through and have your child memorize all 59 of them or anything to that effect, but it's just really helpful. There's 3 primary categories of the one another commands. The first one is unity. And I think that's all what we're striving for and hoping for in our homes, and what we're trying to figure out, how in the world do we bring about unity? Because boy, sometimes my home is so chaotic and disunified. Another broad category is love, loving one another. And then the other main area in which the one another commands are broken down to is in humility and or honor. So the way in which you treat other people, which lends itself from the view in which I perceive myself. And so if I'm perceiving myself with humility, doesn't mean that I'm not as good as anyone else, but I choose to at times put myself beneath someone else in order to honor them and even sacrifice for them. That's what there are several, a good chunk of the one another's that have to do with those 3 primary categories. So again, the 3 primary categories deal with unity, love, and humility/honor. So I would encourage you to read through the list and maybe choose a couple that you want to have be your theme verses for your family. Maybe for 2021, maybe it'll be for the rest of while your kids are in the home. But there's so many great ones. Gosh, one of the first ones I think of is Ephesians 4. Be kind to one another, tenderhearted, forgiving one another. There's so much wrapped up just in that. Years ago, our family went with John and Margie, my sister Margie Couch and her husband John's family. Our kids were young, and we packed up in one car and went to the Santa Barbara Zoo. And on the way down there, we had them memorize Ephesians 4:32, be kind to one another. We shortened it to be that short so that was our theme for the day. And boy, when things started to go awry, we just would say, what was that verse we were going to try to keep in mind today? And it really did help. There's a few other great ones. Another one that's one of my favorites. There's several in Romans 12. There's just a great chunk there in that whole passage that have to do with relationships, but it talks about preferring one another. And that's hard. That's dying to ourselves and what we want for the sake of someone else, and giving them, putting them before ourselves and giving them what they want, even though I really wanted that too. And that's obviously something that we struggle with as adults even, but that's what we're called to teach our children. Gosh, there's some that talk about not complaining about one another. That fits, doesn't it, in the family situation? Bearing with one another. That means putting up with each other's faults. Right. Oh my goodness, that's a hard one. I mean, some of our kids just bug us, don't they? Or they just have the ability to just really bug and get on the nerves of one other child in the family. And there's just a clash that takes place over and over. So how do we go about teaching them to put up with each other's faults and shortcomings? So there's a whole lot there in the one another commands. That could be a whole topic and message in and of itself, or more than one. But we just wanted to say, have that be part of your focus, those underlying 2 scriptures that Missy mentioned, and then as well as some of the one another commands. So that just kind of helps us segue into then talking about the fact that it is so natural for kids to compete and compare themselves with other kids, but particularly within the family unit and with their siblings. So that's just natural. It's not that we're trying to put a stop to it necessarily, but we're trying to guide them through and help them learn how to navigate those natural tendencies well, and in a way that would honor their siblings and even honor the Lord. That's the goal. All parents, all of us want our kids to be good friends, don't we? We want them to be friends at home, but we really have a desire that our kids would be good friends as adults. I know Missy and I both have adult children now. We've talked about this, and there's nothing that warms our hearts more than the fact that our kids like each other. They really do. They want to hang out together. You know, my kids will say, hey, what's the next Farrell family vacation going to be? You know, where are we going to go? And they have a desire to spend time together. And that doesn't just happen naturally. So not necessarily trying to pat ourselves on the back, but
it takes a lot of work.
It takes a lot of work. And, you know, we're blessed in that fortunately somehow we did some things right, I believe, just even evidenced by that. The fact that that just helps us know, though, that we have a huge job on our hands in trying to help our kids learn to get along and like each other and want to be together. The task is huge, ladies. It's daunting, isn't it? But just believe us when we say it's worth the effort, because we're now on the backside of that, and we see the fruit of our labors. Absolutely. So just we have to be willing to put in the time, energy, and effort that requires. Sometimes it's easier to just be lazy and just kind of let the natural, just let it go. And
let the natural consequence take place.
I'm just so tired of dealing with this same issue over and over. But our kids thrive on consistency. So much of this falls in line with the discipline topic, you know, and it's just, they know, and they'll push it. If Mom doesn't usually give on this, but maybe if I just push this time, she'll let it go. And they just want to see if they can get away with it or not. But they actually love it when we enforce what they know are the boundaries, because it just keeps peace and unity at home.
Excellent.
I think even though our kids, we sometimes think they don't want it to be peaceful, they fight all the time. So obviously they don't want it to be peaceful, but inside they really do. They're just trying to figure out, man, how do we arrive at that peace? But yet I still want some of the things I want, and I still need some privacy, and I still want to have some of my own things. And we have to help navigate those waters. Obviously, ladies, some of the relationships depend on personality, and some are just harder than others, like I alluded to a few minutes ago. So again, we have to help navigate that. We have to help the kids figure out what can they do with that one particular sibling who they're like oil and vinegar together. But let's look at it from a positive light, that we have an opportunity to help our kids forge lasting relationships for life. Again, it's worth the effort. So like Missy said earlier, there is a difference between sibling rivalry and sibling conflict. So we're going to delve more deeply into sibling rivalry right now. So sibling rivalry stems from jealousy, competition, favoritism, and comparisons. So that's different than just relational conflict. There's a root issue. It often has to do with comparisons, but all of those things that I just mentioned, I'll say them again: jealousy, competition, We all know that competition is huge within our kids at home. Favoritism, either siblings showing more favorites amongst their siblings, but more often parents showing favoritism with their children, and then the whole comparison game. So often those feelings of rivalry, unfortunately, are triggered by the things that we as parents are doing. Sometimes knowingly, sometimes unknowingly. So we're going to try to give you just some things to try to keep on the back burner, that a yellow flag will go up. That if you hear yourself or your husband or even one of your kids saying something along those lines, that it's like, oof, I think I just fell into that comparison trap. Even though I know I shouldn't do it, and even though I know it's going to, in the long run, damage my child's self-esteem, I was trying to make a point though. And it seems like that'll help me make that point well, to say, why can't you do it like your brother? He just has the ability to figure this out and understand it. Why can't you? Oh, ladies, that's just so destructive. And then what we'll get into more next month in regard to the sibling conflict is that just has to do more with the selfishness of me. I want what I want, and I just want it now. And that's just training foolishness out of our kids. And sometimes out of ourselves as adults, right? Yeah. But so let's then dive in to talking a little bit more about sibling rivalry.
Sure. And one of the things that Gail's alluding to all along there is that so much, just like on the discipline front, so much of what is happening in the home, unfortunately, is a direct relationship to us as parents. It's what we're saying around our kids. It's how we're responding to our kids, or most of the time we're not responding, we're actually reacting. And kids will observe. You're dealing with one child, you may have another child or two off to the side. Don't think for a second they aren't listening and watching. That was my situation. I'm the youngest of four, and the whole joke was Missy never got in trouble. You know why? Because I watched the other three. And so I kind of knew how to navigate that. So, but
interesting point here. I'm the youngest of three. So we have two babies here doing this talk. Exactly. That might be enough in and of itself for some of you to shut down and turn off, but don't do it. Don't do it.
No, we had to deal with firstborn, second, thirdborn in our own family with our kids.
Absolutely. So. The one point I just realized too, it's kind of nice to team teach because you got a chance to glance at your notes. Point that's important that I missed in regard to sibling rivalry is one, that it's often triggered by the parents' behavior, the things that we're doing, like we said, intentionally or unintentionally. Also, though, a good definition or a statement that explains what's going on in the heart and mind of a child who's feeling rivalry or jealousy of or with his siblings is that child is actually perceiving either that he is not loved, not loved as much as, or is in danger of losing parental love. So that's the core difference between sibling rivalry and sibling conflict. Rivalry has much more to do with what the child is thinking in regard to his relationship with his parents. He's feeling either that he's not loved as much as, or is in danger of losing his parental love.
And a really interesting part of that, I think key part of that sentence is perceives. This is what the child is perceiving. And here's where the tricky part is as a parent. You have to help them see the truth. It doesn't deny what they're feeling, but what they're perceiving may not actually be the truth. So as adult children, we've had some stuff we've had to deal with in our family over the past year, and it's been really challenging. And I've had to have some hard conversations where somebody was very, very distraught and upset about something, and everything that child was feeling was real. That child was feeling it. But the perception of what was really going on wasn't really truthful or clear. So we had to kind of break that apart and look at that. Well, that's the same here. It doesn't matter. This is what the child is feeling and perceiving, what they think's going on. So I think that was a really good point.
And I just want to even add to that. I'm so glad that you mentioned key word there is what they're perceiving, because that may not be our intention at all. It may not even be what we're in actuality doing. But if that child child is perceiving it in that manner, we at least have to be aware of that. Now, that doesn't mean that we always cave and we always give in at the expense of another sibling, which is something that we will be talking about next month in regard to helping them navigate the relationship with one another. But sometimes it will change. So that's so funny. In preparing for this, Missy and I were talking and we were saying, in all honesty, I think that I've seen more sibling rivalry and somewhat conflict between my adult kids than what we did in general than when they were little. And interestingly enough, I'm dealing even now with a child who the perception is just that things are just inequitable. And so it might mean that I might have to bend over backwards and do something that to me kind of seems like shouldn't really be necessary, but just to help that perception go away and level the playing field, so to speak, again, then I may need to do that. That takes a lot of insight, a lot of discretion and wisdom to try to figure, and energy to try to figure those things out. And man, that's where I pray for wisdom, like James says, over and over.
Yep, exactly. And so one of the really hard parts here, again, is we're going to ask you as a parent to look yourself in the mirror and ask yourself some really hard questions, because the stuff we're dealing with today is that comparison parenting is the root of much of sibling rivalry. It really is. If we're going to be honest, we're going to look ourselves in the mirror and ask ourselves some questions of, boy, am I doing this? Am I saying things? Am I acting things out that my kids are picking up that are creating some of these comparisons? There's 4 of them that we want to talk about today. And we're going to talk about a biblical example of those, and then we're going to talk about what we do in our family to try to, or what we've done to try to alleviate that. I say do because we're still very much doing as with our kids and grandkids. But so one of the areas that we've hit already, which is jealousy. Want to talk about the biblical example of Cain and Abel. Most of you know that story. You may not. First siblings. One was what we'd call a tiller of the fields, or really a farmer. That was Cain, and Abel was really a shepherd, but we might call that person a rancher at this point in time, took care of animals. That was what their roles were. That story has huge theological impact. But for us today, for our application, the point here is they both were giving offerings to the Lord. The Lord did not look on Cain the same way he looked at Abel's. It had absolutely nothing to do with his work and what he was presenting. It had to do with the heart. That's what we're talking about. We're talking about training up a child's heart. And so in the Lord's interaction with Cain, Cain didn't like it. He became very, very jealous of his brother, perceiving that the Lord was favoring Abel, and he wasn't. He wasn't. He was not at all. But that was his perception, to the point where he was so jealous that he killed his brother. He lied about it. God knew. And so the real point of that story is the failure to believe in God's goodness, right? That's when we do the comparison thing, and then that's where the jealousy comes in. So as a parent, you have to ask yourself, am I doing the same thing? Do I have habits in my life that's influencing my kids' within their sibling relationships, where I am also questioning God's goodness that is causing me to be jealous? So that's the main point of that. What the Lord really wanted from Cain, in my perception, is he really wanted that a contrite and broken heart. He just wanted Cain to say that he was broken and he had done the wrong thing and it came from a wrong place. He wouldn't do it. So the whole rest of the story is what happens with him, but he just wouldn't come to that point. We want to be able to work with our children that they come to that point and understand that in whatever stage and age they're at. So let's give you some specifics, because that's what you've been asking about. So in my family, one of the ways, as Gail said, we didn't experience jealousy a whole lot with the kids, and part of it was we worked really, really, really hard on that. And my kids are all close in age too, so they were in similar activities at the same time. One of the things that we do is we just worked really hard to celebrate each child's accomplishments and encourage during disappointments. And what that means is teaching your children to appreciate another sibling's strengths and weaknesses, and acknowledging where someone may struggle, and then celebrating when somebody has success in that. It could be someone, you may have this one over here, brilliant reader, could read the book, 3 books by the time this person got through 1 page, right? It's hard for this one. You need to teach this one that it's hard for that one, but when that one does it, you need to encourage them. It takes away it's all on you. It takes away the jealousy aspect of things. If you have kids who are a little bit older and you're seeing some jealousy stuff, talk to that child, right?
Absolutely.
Find out what it is that's bugging that kid and then address it, right? But we just worked really hard to celebrate each kid's individual makeup and the things they did well. And when they really had a disappointment, maybe they didn't make a team that they wanted to be on, or an activity, or somebody else was selected to sit first chair in band or whatever, we came around that and celebrated that as well. So that's just some of the jealousy stuff. How about
right.
you and your family?
That's right. I think that's a great point. I think that encouraging, and initially at times it might even be requiring a child to do what Missy just said, to celebrate the accomplishment of his brother or sister, when in fact they just might be mad because that brother or sister seems like they always get first place, or they can always do it better than me. And so just teaching them to, I understand that you feel that way. I understand that it's hard to have your brother, succeed so much, but we're going to choose to be happy for him now.
Because that's his strength.
Absolutely. Right. And then that's the other point I was going to make is it's important to be honest with your kids when they're old enough, which is a fairly young age, honestly. I just was having a conversation just a few weeks ago with one of my 7-year-old grandsons, and he was commenting on how both of his brothers are better than him in regard to most athletic endeavors. And it was interesting because he was acknowledging that very honestly to me, which is a point of maturity, rather than wanting to refuse to admit it. But I basically agreed with him, and I said, they both do really well in sports, don't they? That's amazing. But I know you're so good at some things too. We all have different strengths, bud. And then I went on to point out what he's super good at, what he excels in, and that frankly, he happens to be better than his brothers in that. And so I just think being honest about something, but working hard to find what they are good at. And you might have a child that might be a struggle.
You would.
And you might have to help them explore. Gosh, one of our kids, I can't even think of how many different types of musical lessons we went through. Piano, saxophone, guitar. Music ended up not really ever being her forte, but we tried a lot of different things. We were exploring, trying to find out what was her area of strength. And sometimes that's harder than others. The other thing, let's see, gosh, there was one more thought I was thinking. Oh yes, jealousy can stem though from parents that don't keep things fairly equal. That if a child, sometimes there is some inequity, that we spend far more time or far more energy. Hopefully we're not giving more gifts or something to that effect, but that will cause jealousy. Now, obviously a situation with a special needs child in the home, something to that effect makes it really difficult not to spend extra amounts of time and energy. We'll talk next month more in detail about just the squeaky wheel, getting all of the time and energy and effort, because otherwise the whole home is in chaos and not peaceful if that child's needs, quote needs or wants usually aren't met. But the negative impact that can have on your more compliant child. We'll talk about that more next time. But you just as a parent, particularly when they're young, you have to work hard to keep things quite equal in regard to material goods, time, etc. When they're older, you can teach them that then it becomes more equitable, not necessarily exactly equal. Things change as they become older, but when they're young,
understanding becomes better. Gail and I have talked a lot about the difference between equal and equitable, and they are not the same, and that does change over the course of a family's life. So
as the kids mature.
That's a really important one. So how about competition?
Okay, so the next one then that we wanted to hit was competition. Great biblical example of that is Jacob and Esau. So they were trying hard to win their father's favor. Esau was trying to steal, make sure I get it right, steal the birthright. It was Esau wanting to steal his brother's birthright, correct? And I went to just huge, tried to, cover himself with skin because his brother was hairy. No, other way around, wasn't it?
Yeah.
gosh.
Esau was hairy, Jacob was smooth-skinned.
Correct, yes.
Right.
And so, Jacob covered himself with animal skin so that he would feel hairy because his father had lost his eyesight and was going to reach out and feel him. And the whole bottom line of it was competition. They were just so competing, primarily for their father's approval. But there was so much favoritism when you read the whole story going on in their home.
Right.
Mom wasn't helping matters any. She very clearly had a favorite. Dad had a favorite. And it just set the boys up for constant competition. Competition, like I said earlier, is natural. It can even be healthy. It doesn't mean that it's all unhealthy, but it can lead to and contribute to major issues when some of the things that we've even already alluded to aren't instilled. If you know that one child is always going to lose a race and then he's going to have an incredibly difficult time with that, you might just want to try to downplay some of those types of competitions in the home. But if it's something that they can all participate in and just have fun with, and it doesn't really matter as much who wins or loses, and, just constantly reiterating, not everything has to be a competition, guys, those kinds of things. But the root problem and issue for Jacob and Esau were that they were each out for their own best good. Right. They were not preferring one another. They were not at all trying to hope for what would be the best for their brother,
and their parents played into that.
And their parents played into that.
Huge. Yeah. And on the competition front, Gail and I also spoke about this. In my family, it's not a joke, it's the truth. I'm the most competitive one within my entire family.
And I'm not competitive at all. Yeah. For those of you who know me, you're just dying laughing right now.
And so we were talking about, you ask questions like, what are you setting up in your family? Which is exactly what Gail just said. So if you, maybe you have a turkey bowl, that's a blast. Maybe you do soccer games, that's great. Maybe you do board games all the time, whatever. Just know that all of those are competitive. There's good health to competitiveness.
Oh, absolutely.
There's ways to learn to win, ways to be, a gracious winner and a gracious loser. Those are real good life lessons, but also know that plays into, I bet you I can brush my teeth faster than you. I bet you I can run to the parked car in Target parking lot, which is not safe, quicker than you. And those things, just find out where your comfort level is, and then just know where the stopping point is. You may, again, as parents, be creating an atmosphere in which that competitiveness may go too far. And so you got to know your kids. You got to know your kids, because you're always going to have an older one who's bigger, stronger, and faster up until a certain point. And so that escalates lots of times into fights, which we'll talk about next time. But
right,
anyway.
Exactly. Right. Yeah. And then, along those same lines, that doesn't mean shy away from it. Don't ever allow any type of competition, like Missy said. That can be very healthy. And use it as a life tool, as a teaching tool. Right. Like Missy just said, good sports, bad sports.
Yes.
A couple of our grandsons love to play board games, but then one of them in particular is a pretty sore loser and just can stomp away in anger. And just last week, when they were spending the night, we played a game and Papa T ended up winning. And the grandson, who tends to get very angry quite quickly, looked him in the eye and said, "Great game, Papa," and stuck out his hand and shook his hand.
Good for him.
I could not believe it.
Good work,
interestingly,
parents.
Well, yes, parents, and well, thank you. But no, interestingly enough, just recently he has begun wrestling, and that is required at the end of every wrestling match.
Nice.
They have to look their competitor in the eye, shake hands, and say, "Good job."
Good.
And it spilled over into a simple board game. Nice. Well, we could have cared less who won the board game, especially since it was Papa T. But boy, did we take that opportunity to praise that child for the wonderful sportsmanship that he had just displayed. That wouldn't happen without the board game and without the competition of those wrestling matches. So
that's awesome. Yeah. Hey, let's talk a little bit about being treated unfairly. You hear all the time, this is so unfair, this is so unfair, this is so unfair. Okay, I say to my adult kids all the time, life's not fair. We know that, right? We do. We really know that life's not fair. So you have to deal with that a little bit. Story in scripture that's a really good one in this area is the story of Leah and Rachel. And this has to do, and their uncle really, Laban. But this is a story where Jacob is choosing a wife, and chooses Rachel, and he's forced to wait a certain amount of years before he can marry her, which wasn't fair to him, but he agreed to that. They have the wedding. On the wedding night, Rachel is removed and Leah is brought in, which was very challenging to Jacob. And so the result of that is huge. But what basically was, it wasn't fair to Rachel. It wasn't fair to Leah. It wasn't fair to Jacob. And the uncle was the one who kind of brought all of that about. And
it was Jacob's uncle. It was Rachel and Leah's
I'm sorry.
father.
Oh, sorry.
No,
yes.
no, because it was Uncle Laban to Jacob.
Right. That's right.
Jacob, but it was the girl's father did this.
Yeah. And so basically, the outcome of that is he ended up with 2 wives. There's also with one who was barren for quite a while, one who wasn't. The fairness or unfairness of that perceived and felt and experienced and within the household. So this is a huge one. And so the basic thing here is when we crave to be loved and recognized, sometimes the price we'll go to can really thwart that within a family. This is also really a story of position and placement in the family. And this is one of the questions we get a lot about that. One of the things that happens is the story is when we treat somebody unfairly, all right, don't think for a minute God doesn't see that.
That's not true.
That's the point that really has to become, not only for you, but also for your child, is they think they may be getting away with something, doing something unkind, doing something unfairly to a sibling, but the reality is that God is totally seeing that, and that's what took place here. The same thing happened to Jacob. He did the same thing. He thought he was deceiving God, and God totally saw what was happening. He's now disciplining him and allowing him to experience, even in a time of blessing. That's an important point of all this. So being treated unfairly is not just a way of the world. It's part of a sinful and broken world, right? We know that as Christian believers, and we need to emphasize within our families that position and power in the family unit should never be used or wielded to hold another down. To me, that's what the real big point is here. And it should always be used to build up. So the whole thing in Ephesians about building others up, my kids will say this to you all the time. If they hear something from one of their siblings to them, they'll ask, building up or tearing down? Building up or tearing down? And that is something that even at the youngest ages, you can teach them. Am I building up my sibling or am I tearing them down? If you're tearing them down, it's probably something that's unfair as well. So how we dealt with this in my family, these are 3 hard, fast rules. Some of you won't agree, but hang with me. No teasing or practical jokes in the family. No name calling. No hitting, ever. Full stop, ever. You want to see mom move? Do one of those 3. Right now, as adult children, there's a little more teasing going on in my family than I'm comfortable with. The kids know it, and they know I will step in, even as adults, and go, not comfortable with that. Let's move away from that. So just know this. Some of you...
and let's explain that a little bit, because I think what you're saying is that a joke usually has some element of truth in it.
Exactly.
Probably interrupted you.
No, sorry. It's okay. That's fine. Teasing is always at someone else's expense. A practical joke is always at someone else's expense. You may think it's funny. Your buddies may think it's funny. I guarantee that person, even if they laugh, on the inside is not thinking it's funny. So if you're allowing your child to do that to another sibling, not only is that not fair, you're not building that child up. All right? So no teasing. No practical joking. Name calling in any form is bullying. Any form is bullying. Don't allow it. Excuse my language, but if you hear one of them say, "Hey, boogerhead, come on over here," no, that's not his name, nor his nickname. That's not okay.
It's not respectful.
It's not respectful. It's none of the one another's. It doesn't honor God. It doesn't build that person. It should never be allowed. It is a form of bullying, and hitting is destructive and violent. So you really have to, we're going to talk, sorry, but we are going to talk about this more next time. At what level, not as far as hitting, but what level of physical interaction are you comfortable with within your family unit? But when it comes to hitting, it gets a full stop immediate. So for my family, that's how we address that one. So
right, and the root of that, just briefly, because we do have one more that we want to cover, but just briefly, and that's because home needs to be a safe place.
It has to be the safest place.
And if they just know that a brother can wail on them, and nothing,
or a sister,
correct? Yeah. Thank you for that. Yes, absolutely. And again, maybe because that sibling is bigger or older or just stronger, whatever it might be. But that's just not a feeling of safety.
No.
And home has to be safe. You know, that's the thing that's been so tragic. I know that a lot of us have said, you know, about shelter at home during COVID is that, again, excuse my language, but for a lot of children, unfortunately, it's been hell at home because there's abusive things going on in that home, you know, parent to child or child to child, and it's just not safe. And that's something that Missy and I both value tremendously. Yeah. Okay, so again, we'll touch on that a little bit more next month. But then the fourth area that we wanted to just hit on briefly this month is has to do with favoritism. And that is seen with Joseph and his brothers. So their father Jacob had, I thought it was 12 sons, but when I was reading briefly this morning, I thought it said 11. So sorry, I should have checked that out 12. A little bit. I think it's 12. I know. And Joseph was the youngest. But his father, it just clearly states in scripture, and I love scripture that it's so honest because it doesn't try to paint a rosy picture, but it just very clearly says that Jacob favored Joseph. Joseph was born in his old age and he was the favorite, and he made it obvious to everyone. He gave him a beautiful coat of many colors so that Joseph could just strut around and show off. Bad move, Dad, but bad move Joseph in that he just loved the strutting. And then it got worse because I tend to think of Joseph as being this amazing godly example later in his life. He was. But boy, as a boy, he was awful. He told his brothers, he had dreams, and he told his brothers about how they were all going to bow down and honor him. And it just fueled the anger. And actually, the Bible says the hatred that his brothers felt for him. So dad's favoritism, mom apparently didn't step in or wasn't wise enough to notice it or just didn't have any say in the home, could have been. But the favoritism that was going on in that home set up a horrible rivalry between those brothers. And then Joseph's foolishness played into it, which again, we'll talk about next month more, that's part of what we're having to train out of our kids in regard to helping them solving their sibling conflicts. But that favoritism brought on by dad's poor choices, and then Joseph just flaunting it all, just set up for a horrendous home life. I can't imagine how miserable it had to be in that home.
And some of you may have experienced that. Absolutely. You may have had to have a sibling who was favored over you your entire life, and so you know exactly what this feels like. So good work for you to really continue not continuing that to work
to break the cycle, to break the chain. Absolutely.
So what we're really trying to hit today is just kind of foundation of where our parenting is. It's not perfect. It is all stuff that we strive to do on a regular basis. It's a marathon, not a sprint. You and your husband need to be on the same page, even though you may not be in the same corner. We just want to encourage you along those ways. We are definitely going to get into a lot more specifics next month. Your questions to this point have been excellent. Gail's going to talk real briefly. I know we need to close out here just about some resources and how to utilize resources. And she has some examples that will be available as far as you probably online. For most of you through Megan, we'll be able to see those.
Correct. Yeah, and I didn't bring a copy of that this morning, but I went through 3 primary books, Dobson's Strong-Willed Child, and a couple of others, and actually have the exact page numbers there for you that deal exactly with dealing with sibling rivalry and sibling conflict, and then highlighted the major points so that you can take that resource list. And if you're just looking for answers for one specific issue, you can just kind of skim it. I have it within 2 pages this book talks about that. And ladies, you don't have to read the whole book. In those 3 books, it's just 1 chapter of the book or a portion of a chapter. And in some cases, only 10 or 12 pages that talk in a nutshell about dealing with sibling rivalry and or sibling conflict. And they're excellent sources, and they deal with some very specific issues. There's another reference, a resource on there that is a whole book that talks about dealing with sibling rivalry from a biblical perspective, and it's excellent as well. And then there's one book as well that is for kids. Kids can read. That is a great tool. It really is. It's an easy read for an adult. It only takes like 20 or 30 minutes to read the whole book. It has great pictures, very helpful. That for a child who you could require it as part of their online or your homeschooling curriculum, but just to read it. Why is it that my older brother or sister just doesn't want me to hang out with them? Well, likely because you're annoying, you're whiny, you're whatever. It just really helps to bring it to light for the kids to then kind of look in the mirror at their own selves, like we were encouraging you as moms to do today. So that resource list is available on the website. And
what Gail's been saying all along with that is, you may read a parenting book and not agree with parts of it, but boy, there's some nuggets in there. And she's just, those books are all, actually, I would recommend, but she's definitely made it a lot easier for you just to hit those nuggets and be encouraged through that. So absolutely, those will be there for you as well. Anything more you want to add for this week?
I think that about wraps it up. I think the crux of sibling rivalry is that it does have a lot to do with us as parents and you moms and your interactions with your kids. So like Missy said, it kind of is taking a hard look in the mirror. If you have tons of rivalry going on in your home, as opposed to not just, but primarily conflict, then I'd say take a hard look. Ask your husband, ask your friends to be your mirrors. Do you see something that I'm doing that I'm not aware of? But in a nutshell, I'd say just make sure you eliminate those comparison statements. Don't say, why can't you do this like so-and-so? Or if only you were like this sibling. So destructive. Exactly. And yet easy for us to do. We both said, knowing that
we wish that we,
knowing that, I still said it at times. But then coming back and acknowledging it to that child, telling them how sorry you are, how hurtful and damaging you know that is, and asking them for forgiveness, that becomes a beautiful moment that kids are so quick to forgive. So ladies, don't give up. It's hard work. We know it. It's a daunting task. But again, having adult kids who like to be together makes it all worthwhile.